So in the retail mix we're in at the moment, is private label and the growth of that the only game in town?
It's not. It's of course much broader than that in the way retailers are reacting. Clearly, the change and the crisis we're in have occurred in such an abrupt and sharp manner that it has much greater implications for retailers than just their private label ranges. It has, of course, marketing, merchandising, and many other financial implications, such as the way they manage their inventory, such as the way they play with their assortment, and right now clearly rationalize their assortment to create greater savings.
It's difficult to imagine a large grocery store without manufacturers' brands. So clearly the manufacturers' brands are going to be around for a long time.
There will be, and again, if we keep in mind the fact that most of the largest retailers we are dealing with have built business models that require the presence of brands in their assortment for different reasons we highlighted earlier. So we do not see brands at a brand-free environment within the likes of Tesco, within the likes of Carrefour, Asda, or the largest European retailers right now, because they bring to these retailers a couple of key marketing and financial incentives that for now this retailer have not been able to create or to live without, I would say. And we saw a couple of exceptions on some local national retailers that have set up, that are currently implementing business models that are living with less brands. However, it is not an easy process, and it's not something that's happening overnight. So it's still a bit unclear in terms of how far these national retailers will impact the largest European retailers we're dealing with.
So given all of this, what are the strategies that we are seeing, or indeed you would recommend, for branded manufacturers to be able to ensure that consumers preference their brands rather than their label?
Clearly, the brands have been facing a combination of very intense challenges. Their private label ranges are taking the space at the shelf. At the same time, clearly, we're in an economic downturn, which means shoppers are rationalizing the way they purchase, and they are changing their shopping habits. They shop in more places than they used to. So brands had to react. And in some of the good examples we saw in terms of how they were reacting, clearly it was about increasing the promotional spend and the amount of trade spend that they were investing with the retailers to clearly support retailers in the way they need to bring back or maintain shoppers to come into their stores. So generate traffic within the retailer store became a key part of the brand's answer, and for that clearly promotions aiming at generating traffic has been key and is clearly on the increase. Brands have also launching new product, but I think we have to be careful in terms of not so much really new product that we have seen over the last years, which are clearly aiming at increasing the average basket, but product more targeting the open price point of a category. Somehow the answer to the new private label ranges that we saw from retailers, such as a discount from Tesco, etc. And finally, brands are reassessing the different merchandising tactics, assessing pack size, and trying to see how I can offer a cheaper alternative to the shoppers.
And clearly innovation is a very important tool in order to stimulate consumers and regenerate brands.
Yeah, and I think we can see innovation again on two angles. The innovation, as we saw very recently, on how suppliers are able to innovate to offer a cheaper, more I would say basic alternative within a category. And of course, I would say the traditional innovation that we know, which is the added value one, the one that offers something that was not available until now, that still exists, is still in the marketplace, and we saw some new product launch over the last month performing fairly well. However, we've seen also a reassessment in terms of how this new product launch has to be marketed from day one, I would say, with a strong price and promotion pressure made from the retailers in terms of, yes, there will be at this particular space for this new innovation product. However, you're going to make from day one again a price effort on how you're going to market it.
So it needs to be innovation with price as opposed to just innovation.
To just innovation, which, as we all know, innovation has been carried a more expensive element to it, of course.
Now, you've been doing some work with the TNS World Panel team, looking at how some of the recent promotions, both with brands and own label, have worked in terms of consumer uptake. What's the conclusion from that?
I think what we can clearly see is that while it does, of course, represent an initial significant investment for the brands to further invest and to further promote, and is always something that marketers, particularly within the brands, are afraid of because it dilutes a bit the positioning of the brand, we saw that this increase in promotional spend could offer a very relevant alternative to shoppers compared to the private label ranges. And in some cases, the TNS, for instance, you mentioned data, showed that there would been a switch from private label ranges, retailer private label ranges, in favor of a branded product on promotion because they actually offered a more interesting alternative.
So as the price delta narrows between the private brands and the manufacturers' brands, consumers switching actually into the brands.
After having switched from brands to private label, we see to some extent, especially in some markets like the UK, an alternative trend now, which is in the promoted product, a shift toward the private label in favor of this branded product against on promotion.
We're also seeing quite a lot of suppliers, manufacturers launching new ranges, but actually positioning those in the opening price points of the range. That's a new area for branded manufacturers to get into.
Definitely, and that's again another way on how they see one of the I would say a counter-attack to the rise of private label, and a couple of examples, recent ones that have occurred in the last 2 months or so, which is a launch in Spain from Coca-Cola of a new product called Menos is Más, which is basically less is more, which is a little bottle that gives you powder that then you mix with water. That, I think this little bottle, for example, can give you like 2 liters of flavored juices.
Interesting product.
Which is very interesting, especially if you keep in mind the concept of less is more.
Yeah.
But targeting it clearly at the entry level of this category. We saw also P&G in the States launching Tide Basic, which is again a more basic version of its historical, very strong Tide brand. It's a bit unclear right now if this answer from brands represent the ultimate solution, because clearly new product means greater complexity in the management of supply chain, as well as a risk to dilute your initial brand image, especially in the case of Tide, that is such a strong brand. However, it is it's up in the air right now if can this be one of the potential answers that brands have to consider.
So what do you see rolling the clock forward, maybe 2012? What do you think the private label market will be worth around Europe?
I think our latest forecast we see by that 2012 private label represents about close to 30% of the total European retail market, which will stand at about 450-460, if I remember well, billion euros in value. So we're talking about, of course, a massive, I would say, share of the European retail scene. However, it also has to be stressed on 2 points, which is, from a market, there is some great discrepancies between markets across Europe, with the markets such as Switzerland, such as the UK, having a fairly strong private label penetration, while in some other markets, Italy, and of course the CE market, as well as Russia, Turkey, having a fairly low private label penetration so far. So there will be a balance, but I think it's fair to say that by 2012, a bit less than 30% of the total European retail market will be achieved through private label sales.
And of course we're witnessing greater interest and greater sales of private label brands in America, which has traditionally actually not been a very good market for private label.
Yeah, and we saw as well, I think in America it's interesting because it has a more, I would say, simplest, from what I know, private label offer that is not so, comprising so many tiers as we have witnessed in the, if we just say, take the example of Tesco, for example, in the UK, which has value, now discount, mainstream, and then its upper premium ranges. We saw a more simple private label offering in the States, but that is now also being expanded.
Now, as well as a difference in own label penetration across different countries, there is big variance in own label penetration across the categories. So,
right.
Looking forward, where do you see the categories that's going to have the biggest own brand own label penetration growing?
What we saw across Europe is that the food categories, the grocery categories will comprise the largest private label penetrations, and within the food categories, categories such as the ready meals, categories such as all pre-packaged meal offer will definitely represent the greatest share of private label growth in the coming years. And some other products such as detergent and household cleaning product will also represent a significant share of the growth.
Now, there will be, of course, a big balance, won't there, from a retail perspective to ensure that the stores are still interesting, enticing, exciting, and it is that mixture of brands and own brands that gives that really potent mix of excitement within the stores. How do you see that developing?
Well, clearly, private label, we expect private label, as we said earlier, to continue growing and to actually accelerate in the coming at least a year and a half, 2 years, accelerate its pace of growth. However, we also saw that retailers are still in need of brands, and then from the branded manufacturer's perspective, it will be about making sure that retailers acknowledge the way and how they're actually important for their relevant categories or for their relevant store management. So it's about demonstrating to these retailers, okay, you want to switch my branded product for a private label, but how are you going to fund your loyalty programs? Will you be able to innovate in this particular category? Will you be able to promote and thus to bring back people in store? And that's part of some of the answers brand manufacturers have to keep in mind in their environment on how to tackle private label growth, but mainly by reminding and by stressing out to their retailers, to their accounts, these are the reasons why what I can bring to your table right now, and this is why I believe you're still in the great need of my particular branded product.
And of course, in addition to those arguments, there is also the fact that clearly consumers love brands. And there is a tremendous amount of consumer push in order to ensure that the well-known brands, their loved brands, are actually in the stores they want to shop in.
Yeah, and I think the example that we showed a bit earlier on how as soon as the branded products are under promotion was cheaper than my private label ranges, then shoppers very quickly go back actually to their roots, but at least to their historically beloved branded product compared to their private label alternative.
You talked a little bit about the growth of the loyalty schemes. Of course, we sometimes forget that a lot of the funding of those loyalty schemes comes in some respect from the branded manufacturers.
Very much so, and I think it's very clear to remind, important to remind that without brands there will be no dunnhumby, which is the company that runs Tesco Clubcard loyalty program in the UK, because dunnhumby lives on the product, on the services, on the data it sells, I will actually say, to the branded manufacturers. And it's the same trend we see for the Carte Carrefour, which is Carrefour loyalty programs, which is then trying to be sold to the branded manufacturers who ultimately finance the expansion, the gathering, the collection, and then the strategy that relate from this loyalty program.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Vincent. Of course, we've only touched on just a few aspects of the intriguing, complicated world of manufacturers' brands and own brands, especially in the environment we're in. You're running a workshop and a seminar exclusively on own brands over the course of the next few months.
Yeah, on the 22nd of October in London, we'll run a specific session on private label, and that will get back some of the key points we have discussed about today, but also go further in terms of also how brands have clearly some tools and some angles on how to attack the growth of private label and bring some new dynamics and new elements to their retailers, to the negotiation table.
Great. Well, to find out more about that seminar and more about NVI, who cover many more aspects of retailing and retailers than what we've discussed today in terms of own brands, please go to the NVI website, which is on the screen at the moment. Well, Vincent, it's always a pleasure to speak with you, and thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.